Hello and welcome to the East-West Center Research Program Speaker Series. In this series, we bring speakers from across the Asia-Pacific region to talk about the social, economic, ecological, and political transitions that are shaping the region. Today, we are fortunate to have Dr. Samantha Kies-Ryan come and talk to us about water management in the Pacific. Samantha is the 2023 Rice Fellow, and she's currently undergoing her residency here in Honolulu. She is the director of Earth, Water, People, and has experience of working on water governance related issues in various countries across the Pacific region. So we are very fortunate to have her come and share her expertise and insights with us. Before I hand over the floor to Samantha, a logistical note for all the participants who have kindly taken the time out to join us for this webinar. Please post your questions on the Q&A box that you see at the bottom of your screen. Please avoid posting your questions in the chat box. Also, before I hand over the floor to Samantha, we would like to apologize for the slight inconvenience, that ensued from shifting this talk from from in-person to virtual space. We had to do it owing to certain unavoidable circumstances. So, without further ado, Samantha, welcome. Welcome to all the audience, members of the audience who have joined us. And over to you, Samantha. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your welcome, Sandeep. I'm grateful to the East-West Center for having me. As Sandeep said when he introduced me, I'm the Rice Fellow. What that means is it stands for Research, Innovation and Collaboration Exchange. So I am here for collaboration and exchange. I'm not here to be the expert to kind of teach you all there is about this subject. Today I'm going to be doing a bit of an introduction to the topic. What are the broader issues in water security in the Pacific, and what are the transformational shifts that I think that we need to have, and how can we work together on it? So this is a speaker series talk that I'm doing now. I'm organizing a symposium later in next month on July 18. So this is to kind of set the ground for that and to get people's interest in collaboration and exchange around that. So the talk's going to be doing introductions, understanding the issue of water security in the US position. I'm going to be talking a bit about my PhD research, which was in the Solomon Islands. If we have time, the work I've been doing in sustainable water management post-PhD, and then talking about outcomes for the Rice Fellowship and moving forwards. Okay, firstly, I would like to pay my respects to the Indigenous leaders and peoples of Hawaii, past, present, and future, and their knowledge systems that are ongoing and sustained. I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the three Tundai peoples of Guadalcanal and Solomon Islands who were partners in my research, the Taubata, Kakao, and Simbo tribes, and the other tribes of the Solomon Islands research participants who shared their knowledge and stories with me. About me. So Sandeep's already introduced me a little bit. I'm a community engagement and social impact specialist. I've been working in the Pacific for 15 years. In the Solomon Islands, I'm based in the Marshall Islands now, working in sustainable resource management. Also worked in Fiji a bit and Hawaii. I run a small company working in sustainable resource management. I have a professional doctorate from the Queensland University of Technology, and as I've already discussed, I'm here to collaborate and exchange. Okay, so the International Panel for Climate Change have documented that the need to manage watersheds and water resources sustainably is urgent, and access to clean water now and into the future is a key challenge for Pacific nations. Climate change is one of those impacts. It's impacted through natural disasters, cyclones, droughts, rising sea levels, as well as man-made impacts logging, unsustainable development. I want to kind of say as I begin the talk that what I'm talking about in terms of water resource management, I'm not talking about taps and pipes and water systems. What I'm talking about is ecosystem-based adaptation to climate change. So my argument is that if we want to make communities resilient to climate change, specific communities, we need to sustain and protect as many freshwater ecosystems as we can to give people the most resilience and ability to kind of survive in those islands. The clean access for all, clean water access for all is SDG 6. The United Nations have acknowledged that we are not on track to get there. And that we need transformative shifts in the way that we're working in order to get there. And that concerns the ways that we interact with the biosphere, water, and oceans. So as a communication practitioner, I'm a communication practitioner by background. I have 3 degrees in communication and culture. I'm really interested in how we do those transformative shifts and transdisciplinary practice in general, which I'll talk a bit about. So the US's position in their White House action plan on water security, the Biden-Harris administration recognizes the critical role of sustainable water systems, as well as the global trends that I was talking about that are impacting water security. It also acknowledges that water security crisis is a crisis of national security. So it impacts the US in a range of different ways, from climate migration, which is already being felt heavily, like particularly from Micronesia, where I'm living now, but also potential future conflicts that could be around water. So in my field, I'm interested in the challenges of community engagement in these spaces. So to be able to meet the challenges that we face, we need transformative shifts in the way that we communicate with one another. If we're going to work differently, we need to communicate differently. And so I'm interested in how we make more spaces to collaborate and to really incorporate people into what we do, because I really believe that people are the heart of sustainability. And to make something sustainable, you need to take the people with you. So my work, the whole of my work is like, how do we get all of the community to be engaged, including women and youth and those who are usually discluded in water management and that crux of water and food security. So in my research, I'm not going to cover this too much, but I look at weaving the epistemic mat. It's sort of like weaving different knowledge systems together. How do we use specific storytelling and talanoa and those kind of methods? And how do we interweave different kinds of knowledge, traditional cultural knowledge and scientific knowledge in a way that's not extractivist, that's based on relationships? And it's really important also to say it's not a matter of appropriating Indigenous knowledge or withdrawing it from its context. It's not possible to incorporate Indigenous knowledge in the absence of Indigenous people. It's about creating spaces where diverse voices and knowledges can be spoken and heard. So my PhD, like the Indigenous knowledge and stories that were shared with me, are not in it. It's not shown anywhere except for the Community Nature and Heritage Park. So it's still embedded in those relationships in that place where it was created. And my work is around facilitation process and communication. I use visual creative methods in my research and work. So I use a lot of like narrative-based visual creative methods, such as photo voice, which communities go out and take photos and then bring them together and bring them into a story. Photo elicitation, where we take photos and then talk about it, and then community mapping, community cultural mapping, where the stories are embedded into the landscape and photos. These are well-established research methods. I didn't invent any of them, but what I've been kind of working on is how they are used in dialogue and broader relationships inside of these water projects and these conservation projects. Okay, and my argument is that visual creative methods have the ability to allow for communities to have a voice and to participate in creating their own possible futures and their visions of a good life. And it is this potential that is so valuable to the fields of water management and climate change adaptation. That's along the lines of Amartya Sen's approach to sustainable development, of people having like taking a rights-based approach to people being able to define their own determination and their own futures, and to do that intergenerationally at the community level. So the site of my research, so the Solomon Islands is between Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu. It's incredibly diverse. It's got over 900 islands, predominantly Melanesian, with some Polynesian and Micronesian Indigenous communities. It's culturally diverse, between 60 and 70 different language groups. My work during my PhD and after has been based in Guadalcanal Island in the Solomon Islands. And my PhD was based in Barana, which is a tiny, it's a village and a community-based conservation park just outside of Honiara, in the watershed that leads down the two rivers that lead into the city of Honiara. My PhD research was done in partnership with Solomon Islands National University, Secretary of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, and the Barana Community Heritage Park and the community. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. So I won't go too much into methodology, but to understand what I found, it's important to understand how I got there. So I did participatory action research, where I first I talked to water management and climate change adaptation practitioners who are working in the Solomon Islands about how they engage communities in those kind of, especially around those kind of cultural ideas and values. And then I did the coding analysis and themes, and then I took their insights to Solomon Islands National University, worked with their teachers and students in natural resource management, and we kind of worked together with the data to try and create these dialogical methods to engage with community that might work. And then in the third action research cycle, we actually went out into the community together with researchers from Solomon Islands National University, and put those methods into practice, and took the feedback from the community too. The Barana Community Nature and Heritage Park already wanted to do that cultural and cultural heritage and conservation work together and intertwined, and so that we were able to kind of fit in with what they were already doing. Just the research findings were that there were traditional knowledge systems around the protection and management of water resources that were reported to exist in most of the provinces in the Solomon Islands. In Action Research Cycle 1 and 2, like, I engaged with people from almost every province in the Solomons except for Choiseul. And that they said that these traditional knowledge systems are relational, with different knowledge being held by women, men and youth, and often with different rules governing behaviour and access sites for each group. And so that has implications for, like, obviously who is engaged in the dialogue around these things and in which ways. And the traditional managed systems are currently being eroded and becoming lost, which was reported as a concern, but there was existed limited models to integrate these into current water management practice. So one of the things that we did in Action Research Cycle 2 is we were kind of looking at the power of stories and the role of tabu and the sacred. So what we found, so we did these maps, these cultural maps of the conservation sites. You might see around there that a participant created on the bottom right-hand corner. So they mapped their own communities and, like, the different sites that were used for different things. And kind of what came out was, across the board, was that there were these stories about, it might be kind of a crocodile in a lake or a lady in the lake. And when you kind of interrogated these stories, they had different relationships to the land embedded within these. And the stories were embedded in the landscapes. They were attached to custom rules and laws about how to behave around the water source, and they were relational again. And being degraded again. And a participant's quote was, "When I talk about conservation, it means everyone has a understanding that they shouldn't touch it. It's been conserved because of the traditional knowledge. Like, there's a story about a crocodile and you don't go into that place." And then the community cultural maps. So the maps created a way of understanding and discussing the interconnections between conservation of natural resources and conservation of traditional knowledge. and stories that had already been told could be represented spatially, and these deeper connections and relationships to place could be discussed and understood in different ways. An important part of the process was when we went into Barana was intergenerational dialogue. So we got the young people to go and take photos of the sites, of the water sites themselves, and to create these photo stories about what their concerns were and what their feelings were around the water sources, with the theme of the past, present, and future. What was it in the past? What is it now? Where do you want it to be in the future? And then they presented these photo stories to the elders, and then we had the photos all of there, and then the elders could use their photos to remix their own stories in response. And so it was this intergenerational dialogue about where have we been, where are we now, where are we going? And the research output was these community cultural maps. So this is what we created in Barana. These 6 video stories documenting the cultural and environmental values of the park. And so the background is the SPREPS conservation map, and then we pinned the cultural stories over the top as like an overlay on that knowledge. And because Barana is an ecotourism venture, it's hard to do kind of conservation without an economic kind of basis. So SPREP was doing it as this ecotourism, and so it supported the ecotourism as well in terms of creating this map that the community had, but then tourists could also have it in terms of when they went to that land, they could understand what those cultural values and the practices were around that space and the way that they wanted it to be respected. Yeah, and respecting Indigenous knowledge systems. So yeah, as I said, it was created to support local community in their efforts to preserve their culture and environment. And it was not, the aim is not to extract knowledge out of context or to suggest that it could be universally applied. The stories that we created exist in Barana at the nature park, and that was the agreement with the tribes that it would stay embedded within their place. So the community cultural map is now in Barana Community Natural Heritage Park. It's on a solar-powered interactive touchscreen, allowing for the community to record and preserve its environmental and cultural values. Okay, so the main point that I would like to put forward is that incorporating and valuing cultural perspectives and knowledge and community engagement in water projects should not be an optional extra that cannot be afforded in the rush to get things done. The extra time taken to incorporate this into project design can be paid back in greater impacts and sustainability of these projects and greater community ownership over outcomes. And I always try and make that case in my work that, yeah, people are the heart of sustainability, and it's worthwhile to actually have the intention and the time to do that. Okay, so after my PhD, I worked in a partnership with Plan International, International Water Centre, Live and Learn, and Solomon Islands National University. We took the work forward, working together on a research project also in Guadalcanal, but this one kind of taking some of the research methods that I'd worked on in my PhD and applying them across the catchment in multiple communities. So we had a Water for Women Innovation and Impact grant from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Australia. And the aim of the research was to promote stewardship at a community level around the watershed. So basically, the thinking behind that is like a lot of water practice is done at a community to community level at the village, but a lot of the challenges that communities face are broader than that, particularly if you're looking at ecosystem-based solutions. In the watershed level, communities need to be able to work together because those are broader issues that need more collaboration. So we did the intergenerational dialogue at the community level, and then we went across and did a dialogue between the different communities in the different catchments. Yeah, so we field tested in 2 communities in Western Guadalcanal in October of 2022. I just was talking about the funders. And so the outputs of that research were a case study and a facilitator's guide on how to use photo voice, photo story, and photo elicitation in sustainable water management. And I have those if anybody would be interested in researching that further. So the findings, so this is a quote from one of the members of the water committee, the vice chairman. It's a good thing that photos were taken and the findings were very good. Now we're aware that the water source isn't actually safe, especially in villages where houses are close to the water source or are crowded. In terms of the photos, it actually shows the reality to everyone, including the youths themselves. It really does help those of us in the committee, giving us ideas on how to achieve our goals and redirect our focus on water. Because most of the time we're just focusing on the dam, the pipes, and then to the standpipes, and never understand that the only way that water is functioning as such is because of what actually happens at the catchment area. So we did a bit of kind of awareness on around the water cycle and the way that the catchment works. And then we had the young people go out and document the state of the catchment again, and then they brought it back to the community. And that was, in each case, a huge revelation, because often it's the elders and the seniors in the village who are making the decisions, but they may not have been up to that catchment, in decades in some cases. And so it formed a really strong evidence base that was local and tangible and real, and everybody always wanted to look at the photos. And then it generated this really interesting discussion of like, well, when I was a child it used to be this and now it's that. And so you have that evidence base to actually start a discussion rather than bringing in information and data from somewhere else. And also another thing that the other things that we found, do I have time? How am I going for time? 22. Yeah.
No, good.
Okay, great. So another thing that we found is that the photo voice was a really, really great way to involve youth. And we engaged them first in their own separate workshops. They really enjoyed the photo voice, and they really enjoyed being asked what their opinions were in the community, and to have that respect and standing in the community too, to be able to kind of provide that, gave them an important role. Engaging women was a little bit more difficult and required further facilitation and intentionality. But when we split the women and the men's groups, we got really interesting data that men and women see problems and issues quite differently. And the inter-community dialogue was really, really appreciated, because no one had really done that before, and they really appreciated the ability to be able to talk across and I don't have this photo in the slides, but to be able to create action plans. They all kind of created community and catchment action plans about what they actually wanted to do to conserve and protect their environment in the face of climate change. So talking about the outcomes of this research fellowship of what I'm working on. So I'm going to be working on an article in Asia Pacific Issues, looking at the current state of practice in water security in the Pacific and transformative ways forward, what that currently looks like in practice could be. So look out for that. So the symposium I talked about earlier, we're going to be bringing together people who are working in transdisciplinary ways as practitioners, researchers, artists, and community to talk about water management in the Pacific. If you are interested in being part of that, please, I made a interest form for you to fill out. I believe Justine is sending that around now. And I'd really love it if you could connect with me. As Sandeep was saying, I am in Hawaii for 2 months. I rue that we weren't able to do it in person, because I was looking forward to meeting more people. But if anyone would like to kind of catch up with me for a chat to collaborate on this project, please get in contact with me. And yeah, the idea is that none of us can do this on our own. So I'm looking at collaborative ways forward too, of what we might do to work kind of collaboratively on these issues. If anybody has any questions, this QR code goes to my research website if anybody would like further information about my research. Thank you so much. I hope I didn't speak too fast.
Thank you very much, Samantha. So now we have the floor open for questions and answers. Please remember to post your questions in the Q&A box below, and then I can funnel them to the speaker. So the first question we have is there anything that international partners such as US or Japan can do to help aid in these water security efforts?
Yeah, yes. Yeah. So I think it definitely does need funders on board. I think considering how these projects are funded and run is very, very important, because there are often quite structural constraints about how the work needs to be delivered. And so I think if the community-based projects often take a bit more time and resources, the more time and resources you have, like the more kind of the deeper outcomes that you can have. So I think thinking about different ways in terms of how we run projects and fund them is also integral to the solution. Thanks for your question.
Okay. I have a question about the methodology.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little more about the challenges of using a dialogical process of data collection? Yeah, how do you ensure data quality? How do you what are the steps you took to ensure to monitor the process as a whole? And a closely related question to that is the ethical aspects. You spoke of, you have drawn on community stories and their kind of narratives. So what are the ethical aspects that researchers should keep in mind when adopting this kind of a method? Are there any do's and don'ts that you would like to highlight? Thanks.
I think that I think when you're talking about participatory action research, I actually think that the rigor of the method and the ethics of the method are intertwined. So in each action research cycle, I took the findings back to verify them. I mean, particularly when you're talking about community, like cultural data and that kind of cross-cultural stuff, checking back that you heard what you think you heard is like so integral. And I also think that being transparent with the community about your process and your findings and giving that to them in a format that they value and can use and can then actually utilize towards their own aims of conservation and self-determination is also important. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, sure. So there is another question. How many people in the Pacific Islands still do not have access to regular clean water? And also, could you talk about the challenges that communities and households face in this region while trying to access clean water? Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't put the slides of the stats on there. I do have it in my PhD, but I didn't put it on the slides. I know that I don't have them off the top of my head, but I do know that the Pacific is one of the most challenging is regions in the world, and in the Solomons in particular. And I think part of that is like how dispersed the islands are and how incredibly diverse the range of issues are as well. So across the Pacific, you have like volcanic states and volcanic islands, which have quite different challenges to the tiny little atolls. Like there's a spectrum of challenges that people face. Definitely the most challenge in terms of water security are the atolls. I've been working in the Marshall Islands, where Coral Atoll, they're entirely dependent on rainwater, and so they're quite marginal in terms of it doesn't take much time without having rain for there to be a drought. They nearly called a drought in Marshall Islands in April, actually. So and Pohnpei did this year. So yeah, so it's a little bit hard to answer that in a generalist way. But yeah, the difficulty in the Pacific is that, yeah, such small scale with such large logistics costs, such kind of diversity of peoples. But I think that there are transformative ways that we can work forward.
Okay. We have some more audience questions. So how do you move to reconcile the different perspectives of men and women? Did these differences impact the outcomes?
Yeah, so you have to, good question. So yes, you have to facilitate the men and women separately first, so they each have a comfortable place to speak. So power dynamics are very much important, and that, you know, people are going to be more free to speak peer to peer with one another, and then like giving men and women a chance to present and speak separately in the broader group. That was really important, and some women like felt like they wanted to just kind of write their own perspectives and not necessarily present in front of the group, and that's fine too, creating different spaces for different people to have a voice.
Awesome.
Oh,
So
and
again,
the other thing to say is that in Barana, the men and women did completely different processes and created their own stories, because the cultural knowledge from men and women held was separate and different. So we kept
okay,
them as separate processes.
uh, okay. But if we could broaden this discussion beyond research initiative, like if you, I mean, since you are also now working in a nonprofit, and so if you were to, how do the different perspectives of men and women impact, say, project outcomes? Could you maybe elaborate with some concrete examples how these different perspectives might be influencing the outcomes of water management related projects in this region?
Oh, yes. Good question. So this is actually what led me to do the research in the first place. I started out working with my husband in water management practice, and we did a project in Rennell, and I went around and spoke to all of the women while he kind of went out with the men on the survey. And the women, it became apparent to me that the women talking to me had completely different perspectives and knowledge around what the different sources of water were used for. They were kind of more open to negotiation and different ways of doing things and seeing things. But when the men and women came together in the broader community meeting, the women didn't even have a seat inside of the room. They were all seated outside of the meeting house on the dirt floor. And so that's kind of what made me think about doing this work, and that we really need to kind of create these spaces intentionally for people to express different views and be heard, and for that kind of negotiation to be done before it becomes the sometimes confrontational community meeting, where there's going to be those power dynamics in play about what because the community didn't end up getting a project in the end when we were there, because the conflicts couldn't be resolved, and they since got rainwater tanks, but it wasn't the project that they wanted. And so it is important to structure in the facilitation of the dialogue in a careful way, because it can make or break a project, and definitely lead to it being sustainable and suitable for the entire community or not.
Okay. So another audience question: with the data you currently have, and perhaps the additional data that you will collect in the future, are you considering when and how you will apply the information to helping the groups of people protect, save, and improve their sustainability for water?
Yes, so good question. So being action research, so part of the research is that they develop things that are in use now. So an example, so in the photo story in Barana, the young men put together this photo story where they were kind of deliberately they were kind of showing the degradation of the water source, and then saying, we really don't know if it continues like this, what our future is going to be like. And then they said, we want to know how people related to the water source in the past. We want to know how they lived with the land, and what do we not know now that what they did then. And so they presented it to the men. A lot of them were the chiefs in the village, and they could then kind of create their response. And out of that they documented the traditional rules that protect the Lunga River, which is the main river that flows into Honiara. Things like no gardening by the water source, like certain people could go at certain times to the water source, which kind of kept it fairly pristine. Also, people couldn't settle there, that kind of thing. And so that kind of became part of the bylaws of the park. And also the community cultural map documents some of those stories and knowledge that is also embedded in the conservation of the park. And with the plan research, with the watershed, those catchment management plans have been followed through with Plan International in their the next iteration of their project, because they are looking at that broader catchment scale thinking in terms of climate adaptation. Good question. Thank you.
How do you view, again, a question from the audience, how do you view efforts of UN and I assume other, international agencies, for water, for the efforts for water, for sustainable development and previous such endeavors by it? So what, how effective are these international multilateral processes? And what more can they do? I mean, these last few bits I am just tagging on to the main question asked by the audience.
Okay, that's a really big one. I think it's important to have those frameworks and actions, but I think that the actions at the community level have to be local and intra-local. And so if there can be more collaboration on that level of things being actualized at that level and working in partnership and putting when communities make these plans and these kind of tools of like these determinations of their collective action, to actually support them to move forward in that. One thing that I've noticed that's difficult with these larger agencies and community-based groups is that it's really difficult and onerous actually for the community-based groups to do all of the reporting and the paperwork and the documentation and the applying for funding that these UN agencies and things need. So, so Borana, for example, no one had above a high school diploma, and they were funded by the UNDP and by Jeff and by GIZ, and watching them scramble to try and do the reporting and all of that, they were doing good work on the ground, but to document that was often like beyond their understanding. And so can we think about different ways to make that local activation and action more easily understood and more easily reported on, so that these community groups can actually get the support that they need, and we can actually get funding and action and support down to the grassroots level where people actually need it.
Thanks. Again, an audience question. Did you find time to talk to stakeholders or leaders, decision makers in the community? Also, adding on to it, for those who are uninitiated, could you talk about the social structures in the region where you have studied? What is the interaction between the leaders and the others? Like, what is the nature of the interactions between them? Could you just elaborate on that as well?
Yeah. Yes. Great. Recap the questions.
Did you find time to talk to stakeholders or leaders, decision makers in the community?
Yeah.
And kind of adding on to it, if you could talk a little more about the social structures in the place where you did your PhD research, and the kind of interactions and relationships that leaders have with the other people.
Yeah, great. Okay, so that's a really important point, governance on the local and the national level. Great. So firstly, in Borana, so there was a large engagement process before we conducted the participatory action research. So I signed a memorandum of understanding with the chiefs of the Tundai tribes around what was going to happen, where did the research go, where was the data kept, what were the outcomes, how are we going to relate to one another, what were the benefits that would flow to who in which ways. So at the community level, there's that. So the other thing is that with the research with Plan, I did a political economy analysis of governance around water management and catchment protection in the Solomon Islands. If anybody's interested, I can send that. But in a nutshell, it was really quite fragmented. And I think that this would happen across the Pacific, in that, you know, water is such a broad overarching issue, and yet everybody has a different stake. And so everybody has a different stake and parts that they're looking at. So in the Solomon Islands, for example, like water and water, sanitation and health is the health department. Water and, you know, conservation and climate is like the Ministry of Environment. And then you've got, you know, all of these other stakeholders, Solomon Islands Water, which is like the commercial aspect of water. You know, and you know, they're all looking at things that are to do with the catchment, but nobody's actually working together. And there's very, very little collaboration amongst themselves, and there's very little kind of coordination. And so what you have is like everybody's going down to the community level. The community level are kind of being a bit kind of over consulted, and you know, things like that. They've got all these people rocking up on their door to do different things, but they don't necessarily have that support to engage too, particularly longitudinally, because like when you're talking about catchment protection and management, like that's, you know, it's a 20-year cycle. Like you're doing things that, like an ecological based adaptation, you're doing things that may be like a 20-year time frame. And so how can you do this project to project if there isn't broader collaboration and there isn't broader oversight? And that came to light in Honiara in particular, where there was a massive water crisis through the city that was caused by logging, because Ministry of Lands had said yes to the logging leases on land that was never meant to be logged. But because there were these huge gaps in governance and legislation, that wasn't able to be addressed until it was much too late. And so there's often not overarching legislature structures, as well as collaboration between the different stakeholders that have different stakes and roles to play in the protection of water.
Right. Thank you. The next question again from the audience is, do you have plans to revisit the same community in the future? And then a comment, great research. Thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah. So the community, reached out and contacted me there. So they're doing the next cycle of their project. So they do want to continue with the research. I'm also talking to Solomon Islands National University about how we can actually work together, engaging with other conservation groups as well in the Solomon Islands, and taking the project to the next level in that way, to kind of keep being able to support those conservation ventures in the ground and produce knowledge with them that can then strengthen their conservation outcomes.
Right. Thanks. So the next question is, if you could elaborate a little more on the governance aspects itself. Could you talk a little, could you kind of speak to the current, government policies around water management, say in the Solomons, and what is the, how does the government view this problem? How does it see itself addressing it moving forward?
Yeah. Okay. So so when I did the political economy analysis, like a lot of the Water Act is like from 1972, which is obviously very outdated now. The Ministry of Water, the Water Resources Department sits inside of the Ministry for Mines and Energy. And they are drafting legislation now, and trying to get support to draft the legislation to have like an overarching framework. But that's in process in the Solomon Islands, that the legislation and the broadening bodies are trying to catch up. But the other part of that is enforcement. You can have all of these acts and you can have all of this legislature, but what is the enforcement at the local level? There wasn't a lot of faith of that at the local level, and there wasn't also there was frustration from a lot of stakeholders, particularly the water utility, that there wasn't any enforcement of that in the Solomon Islands context, like if there were logging outside of the logging concessions and things like that. And the other thing that was happening when I was there is that the watershed and the catchment wasn't even broadly understood, actually, because as many atolls and island environments, it's karst geology, so limestone. And so they were actually finding that a lot of the turbidity that was in the the water supply for the city, the main water supply, was actually caused by logging a valley over. And because they didn't know enough about the environment and hadn't done that mapping until there was an issue, nobody really understood what the implications were for the broader environment until they started kind of looking at those studies when there was already turbidity in the water.
Thank you. And, since this is a research seminar, so could you talk about some of the research questions that that you have identified through your work, and how can researchers contribute to this process of better understanding and strengthening water governance in the region?
Yeah, okay, there's a couple of parts in that question. So my research questions were around how the dialogical methods could be used to kind of strengthen that community governance, and how where the members in the community could be given a voice in that, and how that could kind of work, and then how it could kind of lead to, like, in the participants' eyes, kind of outcomes that they kind of would value. So that's what I was doing in terms of my PhD research. The second question that you asked was around governance. But I think that we can't have governance. As I think that the example that I gave before, shows we can't have proper governance and policy and legislative and enforcement if we don't actually have the data. Without having the data to underpin that, it's can be shooting darts in the dark in terms of protecting our water sources.
And we have one more audience question. What are the main environmental challenges facing watersheds and sub-watersheds in the Pacific region? And how do human activities and climate change impact water quality, biodiversity, and the sustainability of these aquatic ecosystems?
Wow, that's a big one. Okay, so in the Solomons, where I was looking at, like, the number one impact would be logging. Logging in the watershed is the main cause of turbidity and loss of water security in the Solomons, and I would say that would probably be the case in many areas of the Pacific where there's heavy logging. And then it's also, you've got kind of human impacts of sanitation. People, one of the things that they talked about is piranhas, like people, like squatters moving into settlements by the watershed. Changes in kind of practices around the water. Also, and then you've got, as I was saying in the first slide, climate impacts of changing levels of water, rainfall, and rising sea level rise, which can make surface water brackish. Also, it can pose threats to groundwater, rising sea levels, because the environment will have like a tipping point where it'll be resilient, and then past a certain point, the ecosystems lose their resilience. And then, king tides.
Okay.
Natural disasters.
Okay. We have more questions coming in. So do you think the communication methods and projects can be designed to achieve both community needs and also address reporting needs of donors at the same time? What considerations would you need to make?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I think that I mean because that is the crux of the issue, in that the donors design something and it often doesn't fit to community needs, and then if the community wants to do something, it often doesn't fit to donor needs. But are there middle grounds that can be created? And I think key to that question is who designs the projects and who develops them, who evaluates them, to what purpose, for what.
And finally, what impact can technology have in managing the crisis and also the collaboration between countries? Role of technology and international collaboration in mitigating the water crisis in the Pacific region.
I think in terms of us seeing one another and being able to share information and knowledge, I think in terms of that peer-to-peer learning of communities being able to see and talk to one another, that has the potential to be incredibly powerful. One of the things that the communities really, really liked when we worked at the catchment level in the research project, they really loved like seeing each other's evidence. Because, you know, if the elders hadn't been to the water source, the people who lived downstream had not seen what was going on upstream. And so the ability for them to see one another and to have that you know, local evidence base provided by digital technology, and for them to kind of have faith in like, oh, well, that's exactly what happened. You know, they don't, how would they know in the village what it looks like upstream if they don't live there or have family up there? So I think making us visible to one another and then being able to chat with one another and share solutions and kind of collaborate together is something that digital communication and digital technology really provides for us.
Terrific. So with that, we are drawing to the end of this session. So before we close, Samantha, do you have any closing comments?
Oh, thank you for the fantastic engagement, everyone. I put up my email and my contacts, so I encourage anybody who's interested in collaborating in this and knowing more about this and working towards it for the seminar in a month to, get in contact with me.
Well, thank you, Samantha.
Thanks for your in-depth engagement and questions. They were great.
Thanks, Samantha. Thanks for that wonderful talk. With that, we come to the conclusion of today's session of the Research Speaker Series. We would like to thank all the members of the audience for taking the time out and joining us for this talk. Just to give you all a heads up, the next talk is on the 27th of this month, that is within a couple of days. We're going to be joined by the former Chief Scientist of World Health Organization, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, who will be sharing her insights about the lessons that we have learned from the pandemic. The link for registration has been dropped in the chat box. Please feel free to join. Once again, thank you one and all for joining us and for your engaged discussion during this talk. See you.